Hello, and welcome to Autumn's Notes app, where we explore all things written, filmed, and otherwise recorded for our collective research and yapping purposes. My name is Autumn, and I have a lot to say about the film 500 Days of Summer. I watched this movie for the first time in April 2026, and believe me, I know I'm many years late to the party. I've known about the movie for a while, but I decided to wait to watch it until I was in a solidly good place in life, and I'm glad I did. It probably would have destroyed me otherwise. I know people have pretty strong opinions about the film, but even though I am just sharing my opinions, I would ask you to keep an open mind to other perspectives. I decided to finally watch it because I'd heard so much talk about how Summer was the villain and totally in the wrong, and I wanted to form my own opinion so I could hold a discussion with someone about it if necessary. I've done my best to examine the story from various sides, and I hope I can shine a light on some things you might not have considered before. Before we get into that, though, we've got to talk about the movie premise and the plot. 500 Days of Summer is a 2009 film starring Zoe Deschanel and Joseph Gordon Levitt. Zoe Deschanel plays the titular Summer Finn, a whimsical young woman who's enjoying her independence after moving to Los Angeles, but who doesn't believe in love as a result of her parents' divorce. Joseph Gordon Levitt plays Tom Hansen, a hopeless romantic raised on media that glorified the idea of the one. While his true ambition is to be an architect, he's employed at a greeting card company where he meets Summer, his boss's new assistant, and he instantly thinks she's the person he's been waiting for. The film details their complicated romance as Tom reflects on the relationship post breakup, hoping he can find a way to win her back. Now, I do say relationship and breakup, even though they weren't officially exclusive at any point. I just think that's an easier way to refer to things, and for some reason, saying situationship to refer to something that happened in 2009 just doesn't sit right. The movie doesn't present things chronologically, but for the sake of simplicity, I'll tell you how things play out in order. I've created this handy dandy timeline to help you visualize the order in which things take place. It was actually a little tough for me to conceptualize the passage of time while watching, since in everyday life, we don't tend to measure longer amounts of time in days, so this timeline is for my benefit too. I'm presenting it as an actual calendar, and really quickly, I'm going to give you the premise of the dates I chose. Now, listen. Canonically, Tom sees Summer for the first time at a company meeting on January 8th. That's day one. And then on day 28, the office goes to karaoke on Friday. I looked at calendars from 2009 all the way back to 1998. In all those years, there's no instance where day 28 could fall on a Friday. It's simply impossible. I tried to do research about what year this film is set in, but I couldn't find anything. If any of you have that info, I'd love to know. So I've made the executive decision to set my timeline in 2008 and 2009. You'll notice that some of the timing doesn't really make sense, like date outings fall on weekdays when they should be working, or something falls on a Tuesday when I told you it happened on a Friday in the plot summary. Just go with it. The calendar visual is more so to provide a concrete sense of time progression. And with that, let's start. During a company meeting, the boss, Mr. Vance, introduces everyone to his new assistant, Summer. Tom instantly takes an interest in her, but he's discouraged by his friend and coworker Mackenzie, who says she's clearly uppity and thinks she's too good for everyone. A few days in, Tom and Summer happen to get in the elevator at the same time. Very romantic. He's got his headphones on, listening to There Is a Light That Never Goes Out by the Smiths, and when she hears it, she says the iconic line.
I love the Smiths. They said I love the Smiths.
Cue Tom basically falling in love with her on the spot. Tom makes conversation with Summer at their coworker Millie's engagement party, but then he's like crashing out to his friends Mackenzie and Paul a couple weeks later. Why? In the elevator at work, he asked Summer how her weekend went, and she replied, "It was good." Emphasis on good. And according to Tom, she basically told him she spent the whole weekend sleeping with another guy. Right. He switches up again the next weekend when the office does karaoke at a bar. He watches Summer sing, and afterwards, she, Tom, and Mackenzie chat. She expresses that she doesn't want a boyfriend because A, she's young in this new city, she wants to explore her independence, but also she doesn't feel comfortable being anyone's girlfriend. And she and Tom have this disagreement on the notion of falling in love. She believes it's impossible, while he pretty much has staked his life on believing it's inevitable. By the end of the night, Mackenzie is unbelievably drunk, and Tom and Summer escort him out to a cab. But before he takes off, Mackenzie lets it slip that Tom likes Summer, leading to a playful but tense moment between them. I like this scene a lot. You really feel the chemistry between Zoe Deschanel and Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and they're playing things super naturally. It's a very human scene. Summer suggests they be friends, and even though it kind of seems like they're gonna kiss, they ultimately part ways for the night. No need to fear though, because this is definitely not a slow burn. Summer spontaneously kisses Tom in the copy room a few days later, sparking their romance a month after their meeting. On an early IKEA date, which involves them role playing husband and wife in the various room sets, Summer tells Tom she isn't looking for anything serious, and he agrees to a casual relationship. Keep that in mind, he did verbally agree to be involved casually. And that night, they go back to his apartment and sleep together for the first time. Over the next couple months, they grow closer as they spend more time together. They go on a record store date and discuss some of the bands and artists they enjoy listening to. And Tom also shows her around some architecturally interesting parts of the city, and they sit on his favorite bench overlooking a section of buildings. When Tom comments on how nice the view is, Summer points out the parking lot in the middle of the scenery. Put a pin in that for later. And she encourages him to draw how he would reimagine it. This moment kind of plants the seed of Summer inspiring Tom to start pursuing his passions instead of shoving them down. On day 109, Summer invites Tom over to her apartment for the first time, and among other conversation, she opens up to him about an emotional dream that she's never described to anybody else. And this night changes everything for him because he feels like she's finally letting her guard down a little bit, and he tells her, I guess I'm not just anybody. Famous last words. A little under 3 months into their romance, Tom gets a push from his little sister, Rachel, to ask Summer about their relationship status. He brings it up while they're driving later that day, and Summer responds kind of flippantly, telling him they don't need to define anything as long as they're both happy. He accepts that for the time being, but as you could have guessed, his feelings have already left the casual layer of the relationship atmosphere. He is, in fact, fully in space. Just a month later, Tom declares to Paul that he's in love with Summer, listing various qualities of hers that he loves. It's a good representation of how when you love someone, every small thing about them seems special. And Tom channels his happiness into work and sees a huge performance boost, whereas before he treated it like any other job. A bit later, Tom and Summer go on a movie date at a theater and laugh along with the rest of the audience. 6 months into knowing each other, it seems like things are going pretty well. After this, though, there's a pretty big time jump in the events we see. On day 259, Tom and Summer are sitting in a bar having a pretty dismal conversation. Tom's going on a less than agreeable rant about contemporary women's fashion and failing to pick up on Summer's unenthusiastic responses. During this conversation, a man approaches Summer and tries to pick her up with this sort of arrogant swagger. She calmly but firmly rejects him, at which point the man assumes Tom is her boyfriend and insults him. Tom, who was already kind of wound up, impulsively punches him, then gets punched back way harder. Back at Summer's apartment, they have an argument. She's disappointed in him for getting into a fight with a random guy, and when he points out that he did it for her, she insists they're just friends. And Tom says this isn't how you'd treat a friend, and regardless, he ought to have a say in their relationship dynamic too. And at that point, he storms out. After a sleepless, rainy night for both of them, Summer shows up at his place and apologizes for getting angry. He tells her it's okay if they don't put a label on the relationship, but he does need some emotional consistency, and she admits she can't give him that. Nevertheless, they kiss and make up as they retreat into his room. And in the daytime, Summer tells Tom about some of her previous relationships, and when he asks why they ended, she simply says, life. Their relationship deteriorates over the next month. The last date we see is at IKEA again, or at least a household furniture store. Tom tries the husband and wife bit again with one of the sinks, and Summer's just not into it at all. And finally, sitting in a diner on day 290, Summer tells Tom they should stop seeing each other, considering, in her words, they constantly argue and she keeps hurting him. This brings to an end their romance of about 8.5 months, though again, nothing was ever official. Tom crashes out with Mackenzie and Paul in his apartment and starts breaking plates in the kitchen, and they call his sister Rachel for help. This is the very first present day scene that were shown in the movie. And Tom tells them all how the breakup went down and expresses his determination to get Summer back. Naturally, that goes pretty poorly. Tom's work performance seriously tanks, especially since Summer quit, and Mr. Vance takes notice. It'd be hard not to, since Tom's supposed to be working on romance cards and he keeps writing super depressing stuff. Mr. Vance expresses concern for Tom in a one on one meeting and transfers him to the funerals and sympathy department, encouraging him to channel his emotional struggles. He's a great boss, all things considered, but Tom takes it as a bit of a punishment and it's kind of a breaking point for him. Having hit a new low, Tom declares to Mackenzie and Paul that he hates Summer and he puts a negative spin on all the qualities he previously said he loved. Paul and his girlfriend Robin then generously set him up on a blind date with a woman named Allison, and it's probably the hardest scene to watch in the whole movie. Tom completely sabotages the date by complaining about Summer the whole time. He gets annoyed when Allison takes her side, then gets super drunk and makes a fool of himself during karaoke. Allison walks out in the middle of the song, and I don't blame her at all. A couple months later, Tom boards a train to attend Millie's wedding. She's the coworker who got engaged at the beginning of the film. And he thought Mackenzie was coming too, but it turns out Mackenzie was never actually planning to attend. So now flying solo, Tom's on the way to his seat when he realizes Summer is a few rows back. Even though he tries to avoid her, she strikes up conversation and they catch up over coffee on the train ride. They sit together at the wedding, then dance after Summer catches the bouquet toss. It's a very vibey scene, from the cinematography to the soundtrack. Shout out Sweet Disposition by the Temper Trap. And the scene ends with her inviting Tom to her house party the next Friday. When he gets to her apartment, he has a whole vision of how the night's gonna go. The scene's layout is interesting. It's presented as a split screen expectations versus reality comparison. In Tom's mind, he expects Summer to welcome him warmly, introduce him to her friends, and spend the whole night giving him her undivided attention. Once the other guests leave, she'll kiss him and rekindle their romance. In reality, she greets him in a friendly manner and makes small talk with him and another friend, then goes about making the rounds. She's the host after all. While standing on his own, later he watches Summer interact affectionately with a man he doesn't recognize and later sees her showing off an engagement ring. It's actually a deeply emotional and impactful scene. Tom flees the party and stumbles down the road as he realizes there's no hope for him and Summer. He spends the next month in a depressed haze, and one day he quits his job in the middle of a company meeting. In his eyes, the company is doing a bad thing by enabling people to give their loved ones cards instead of letting them express feelings in their own words. It shows where his mind's at, wondering if his life would be different had he expressed himself to Summer directly. And it's a reasonable culmination of his discontentment with his career. By day 450, Tom is still hung up on Summer, which his sister Rachel is getting fed up with. She tells him that even if he believed Summer was the one, Rachel never did, and he's in denial about how perfect their relationship was. She encourages him to dig a little deeper the next time he reflects, and we see Tom cycle through a series of memories. At first, they're the same as they were presented throughout the film, but over time, there's a shift. There were a variety of moments where Summer was annoyed, sad, or otherwise emotionally struggling that we didn't see before, either because Tom avoided thinking about those moments or because he rewrote events in his head. For example, during their early record store date, Tom remembers them exchanging witty banter about the Beatles and their albums, when in reality, Summer rolled her eyes at a comment he made. Or on a movie theater date where they watched The Graduate, Summer cried throughout the ending where two newlywed characters ride off in the back seat of the car, and afterwards she decided not to spend the night at his apartment. With his rose colored glasses off, so to speak, Tom is spurred into action. He launches back into his passion for architecture, reading up on literature, and reworking designs until he crafts something he's happy with. And at the same time, we see Summer get married, roughly 2 months after she got engaged and 6 months after she called things off with Tom. Tom interviews at a ton of places, and before one such interview, he goes to his favorite bench where he once brought Summer. There, he encounters her by chance, and they catch up a little. He admits he's confused about how she could get married so quickly when she previously didn't want to be someone's girlfriend. She explains that she woke up one day and simply knew, while with Tom, she was never sure of that same thing. They have an interesting exchange where Tom tries to say she was right about true love being a joke. There's a lot of bitterness in the statement. The heartbreak he went through challenged one of his primary worldviews. But Summer refutes him and says she actually came to believe he was right about love all along. She met her husband when she was reading The Picture of Dorian Gray in a random deli, and he commented on it. And if all these coincidences of time and place had to align for them to meet, it was clearly meant to be. They share a quiet, reflective moment, and before she leaves, Tom sincerely wishes her happiness. A couple weeks later, Tom arrives at a job interview and encounters a woman in the waiting area, a fellow interview candidate. They exchange small talk and banter, and she comments that she's seen him sketching at Angelus Plaza, the area with his favorite bench. Before he's called back, Tom takes a leap of faith and asks the woman to coffee. She initially says she has plans, then changes her mind at the last second and agrees to go out. So Tom introduces himself, she follows suit, and she tells him her name is Autumn. And with that, the counter switches back to day one and the credits roll. So that's the plot of the film. I hope my timeline coverage made sense. Feel free to leave feedback on the format, and I'll take it into consideration if I do anything similar in the future. I'm first going to tell you some of my more general thoughts before I get specific. I really enjoyed this movie. I don't think I would have appreciated it as much a few years ago, and like I said at the beginning, it probably would have destroyed me emotionally. I'm very grateful I chose to watch it when I did because it allowed me to absorb the story without getting so wrapped up that I couldn't separate my experiences from the narrative message. Zoe Deschanel and Joseph Gordon Levitt absolutely killed their roles. They disappeared into their characters in the best way possible, and I thought they portrayed Summer and Tom's nuances perfectly. There are some movies where the story could work equally well with other talented actors, but I don't think 500 Days of Summer would have struck the same chord if anyone else played the leads. Their chemistry was off the walls from the start, and I found their interactions quite realistic, painfully so at times. The dialogue and directing really captured the awkward magic of connecting with someone at a pivotal time in your life. Speaking of which, I was shocked to find out this was Mark Webb's feature directorial debut. I think he did a great job guiding the actors' performances and bringing the film's creative vision to life. Everything felt so natural and human and flowed really well despite the non-linear storytelling. It made a lot of sense when I found out that Webb went on to direct the Amazing Spider Man films with Andrew Garfield just a few years later. Those films are often praised for having emotional depth and a sense of magic despite their dark and gritty tone, plus incredible chemistry with their leads. Webb also went on to direct 2025's Snow White live action adaptation, but we don't have to talk about that. When it comes to the writing, I want to praise it for being intentional without coming off heavy handed. Each line of dialogue served the purpose of forwarding the plot slash relationship or telling us something about the characters and their worldviews. I never felt like a scene dragged on too long or like there was no point to a given conversation. The writers, Scott Neustadter and Michael H. Weber, did a great job keeping things concise and meaningful. And if you're curious about their other work, they're apparently a duo who worked on screenplays such as The Fault in Our Stars. The romance between Tom and Summer was also based on a real life breakup that Neustadter went through, which probably helped give the film that relatable, endearing quality. I wasn't a huge fan of the voiceover narration, which mostly came in at the very beginning and very end, but I don't have specific complaints. It just didn't speak to me as much as the on screen interactions between characters, and I prefer receiving information through dialogue and environmental clues. But that's just my preference, and it's not enough of an issue to detract from my overall impression of the film. Finally, I thought the environments were striking and well utilized. I've personally never been to Los Angeles, but it was an interesting peek at the city. I'm sure it's changed a lot in the nearly 20 years since this film was released, but it really felt like a moment captured in time. Apparently, it was initially set in San Francisco, but later reworked, both to be set in LA and to bring the setting more into the narrative forefront. I think that was a good choice, especially given Tom's passion for architecture. I wouldn't have connected to his motivations if I didn't feel like I was seeing the city through his eyes. Maybe the story could have worked in San Francisco too, but not if the city just served as the backdrop for the romance. I also want to address the minor characters, at least the ones with notable speaking parts. There aren't a ton of them, but they each play important supporting roles in the story. An obvious first one to address is Mackenzie, Tom's coworker and friend. He is played by Jeffrey Arend, who has guest starred on episodes in the Law and Order universe, Grey's Anatomy, and recently NCIS. Mackenzie's never had luck with the ladies. As Tom so graciously points out, his last girlfriend was back in middle school. And Mackenzie starts out as the more cynical friend. He has a tendency to drink too much on nights out and pretty much acts as he pleases. He snitches on Tom for liking Summer and later ditches Tom on the way to Millie's wedding. He does care about Tom, though, which shows more and more throughout the film. He tries to get Tom to open up about the breakup when it happens and is visibly concerned that Tom doesn't want to talk about Summer for once. When Tom's depressed after finding out about Summer's engagement, Mackenzie's the one who tries to get in touch with him until he shows up to work late. And just a few minutes later, Mackenzie tries to stop Tom from going on a rant and quitting his job during the company meeting. I mean, quitting ended up being the right choice, but Tom did give a very dramatic speech that damaged his standing with his coworkers, and I think that's more so why Mackenzie was trying to rein him in. So Mackenzie's a decent friend overall, and I appreciate that he wasn't solely a stereotype of the zany coworker. He has some emotional maturity, and he wasn't constantly unserious. There's a balance with characters like this. I think the film struck it well, and Arend played it well. Next up is Paul, the final member of the friendship trio. He isn't on screen as much as Mackenzie, just by virtue of him not being a coworker, but there are still some things to say about him. Paul is the more level headed friend and also serves as a mirror to Tom's relationship with Summer. Paul has been with his girlfriend Robin since 1997, since they met in middle school and clicked immediately. So, on the one hand, Tom argues that Paul can't understand modern relationships not needing a label. But on the other hand, Paul's clearly doing something right. His relationship contains the stability that Tom and Summer never achieve. Paul is played by Matthew Gray Gubler, who most of you probably know as Spencer Reid in Criminal Minds. Now, I didn't know this at first because I'd never seen Criminal Minds, but I started watching on a whim and I love it. Gubler's acting is fantastic there, and I think his casting in 500 Days is also very well done. His small mannerisms and speech patterns make Paul feel like a real person, despite some of his more outlandish lines of dialogue, and he does sarcasm and banter quite well. I also thought it was an interesting choice for Tom to tell Paul he's in love with Summer one on one rather than in a group scene with Mackenzie. It's never stated how Tom and Paul know each other, but the implication is they're close friends despite not spending their workdays together. He doesn't show up as much in the latter half of the movie, but I enjoy the presence and logic he brought to the story. A character with a small but very significant role is Autumn, the woman with whom Tom connects at the very end of the movie. Now, I may be biased for one reason or another, including the fact that she's played by the lovely Minka Kelly, but I like her a lot. The movie doesn't present her as this wildly perfect woman, and the writers made the wise decision not to show anything beyond her and Tom's first meeting. The point of Autumn is that she's a new person Tom is allowing himself to connect with. Nothing extraordinary happens. They make good conversation and agree to get coffee, but they do seem compatible. They share a sense of humor as well as a passion for architecture, and without even realizing it, they've been drawing inspiration from the same place, Angelus Plaza. Tom and Autumn click not because Tom decided she was the one, but because their chemistry formed so quickly it was undeniable. It's also a parallel to how Summer met her husband. As she said, if all these factors have to line up for two people to meet, them interviewing at the same time at the same company of all the places in LA, it must have been meant to be. The second to last minor character I want to mention is Mr. Vance, Tom's boss. He's played by Clark Gregg, who is a cutie pie and who played Agent Coulson in the Marvel Universe. Even though he doesn't have a ton of screen time, I think his character is exactly what it needed to be. He's an average guy in a stable marriage, content with his position at the company, and he is a pretty good boss. He is empathetic towards his employees' personal struggles, and he isn't a micromanager. Those traits really underscore Tom's dissatisfaction with his own position in life. Here he is working at a chill job with a great boss who cares about him, but it's not what he wants. He's surrounded by people who are perfectly happy with their place at the company, and that's not him. His ambitions go much further, even if it takes him a while to admit it to himself. If Mr. Vance was a bad boss, or if he was a ladder climber hungry for promotion, it would have undermined the significance of Tom's choice to quit and pursue his goals. His character is perfect just as he is. The last minor character I'm going to talk about is Allison, Tom's blind date, and my thoughts on her are the same. She is played by Rachel Boston, who has been in plenty of films and guest starred on shows like NCIS and ER. Allison is only in the film for one sequence, but just like Mr. Vance, she was exactly who she needed to be. She was earnest at the start of the date, taken aback when Tom admitted it wasn't going anywhere, honest about his lack of reflection towards Summer, and self respecting enough to leave once Tom completely embarrassed herself. She was a real person, and she emphasized how unprepared Tom was for serious dating. If she'd been inconsiderate and vain, I think you'd feel bad for Tom. Like, oh man, look how harsh the dating world is now that he doesn't have Summer. But instead, you feel pretty low about him and his conduct, and that's exactly what needed to happen. Those are all my thoughts on the minor characters. Let me know if you were particularly drawn to any of the characters when you watched, and let me know if you started watching Criminal Minds before or after you saw this film. With that out of the way, I want to talk about the conventional timeline of relationships. I think we can acknowledge that even if there's no right approach to relationship progression, there are ranges most people consider acceptable. For example, most people would agree that if you're looking for a serious relationship, you shouldn't see someone for more than 2 or 3 months if they don't want to make things official. Most people would agree that if marriage is your end goal, you shouldn't stay in a relationship with someone who hasn't expressed that intent after 3 or 4 years. Along the same lines, most people have a period of time they consider acceptable for someone to wait post breakup before getting into another serious relationship. Move too quickly and you seem callous or on the rebound. Move too slow and you seem damaged or hung up on your ex. It can be difficult to reach a middle ground in that regard. The main thing I want to discuss is, of course, the timeline of Summer getting engaged and married after breaking things off with Tom. We've established that Tom and Summer met in January 2008 and were involved from February to October. Summer got engaged in February of 2009 and married in April. In the movie, she says that when she danced with Tom at Millie's wedding, her husband hadn't proposed yet. So she got engaged sometime between the wedding on February 11th and the party on February 17th. Let's say she got engaged on February 15th. That would be roughly 4 months after she broke things off with Tom. Would most people consider 4 months a quick turnaround from breaking things off with one person to getting engaged to another? Yeah, I'd say so. Is 4 months objectively too quick to get engaged after breaking things off with someone? No, it's not. I have two primary arguments here. Argument number one: a lot of viewers seem to assume Summer met her husband after she broke things off with Tom, and there was 0% overlap. However, we don't know that for a fact. I think the writers kept it intentionally ambiguous because at the end of the day, it doesn't make a huge difference, but there's a fair chance Summer met her husband while she and Tom were still involved. Regardless of whether or not they became involved until after she broke things off, the timeline of her relationship is not as concrete as 4 solid months from meeting to engagement. Further, there is a point to be made that successful romances can emerge from unlikely or unconventional circumstances. Do all couples who date in high school stay together for the rest of their lives? No, but some do. Do all long distance couples in different countries make it work? No, but some do. Do all couples who get married several months after meeting each other end up in a lasting, happy relationship? No, not all, but then again, some do. That doesn't mean these circumstances will work for everyone. You have to account for the individual people, their compatibility, and how much they're willing to communicate and work through conflict. And a lot of relationships do fail under these circumstances. You change a lot from your high school years to adulthood, long distance is tough, and knowing someone for a few months isn't always indicative of how a life with them will look. However, you can't discount that some relationships do work out from these circumstances. Some people have incredible chemistry right off the bat and have a great impression of each other, and that becomes the foundation for a lifelong marriage. Now, whether Summer's marriage will last is a separate and frankly irrelevant conversation, but the main takeaway is this: we can't prove that Summer only met her husband after she broke things off with Tom, and even if she did, that amount of time is not inherently too short to make serious decisions within the relationship. Argument number two: we received this story through Tom's perspective, but that doesn't mean their relationship meant as much to Summer as it meant to him. Summer's name is in the title, but Tom is the protagonist. We see his version of events, as evidenced when we see how he rewrote scenes in his head, and he's the one we follow as an individual when he and Summer are apart. If I'm remembering correctly, the only individual scenes of Summer are the clips during her character intro, the shot of her watching the phone the night of the bar fight, and a few seconds of her at the altar getting married. Otherwise, we don't see Summer's life outside of her interactions with Tom. Tom places a great deal of significance on his relationship with Summer, so that's how we perceive it. We feel like this is the end all be all of relationships and they're going to change each other's lives. And that's his experience of events, which is valid. Let me say that up front. He does feel very strongly for her, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that, especially because she does reciprocate up to a point. But the truth is, Summer doesn't owe it to Tom to feel the same way he does about her. Let's sit in that for a second. Summer does not owe it to Tom to feel the same way he does about her. You might be like, that's not revolutionary, and it isn't, it shouldn't be. And yet, a lot of people act like Summer's a bad person for not matching Tom's intensity and commitment. Like, because he perceived their relationship as deeply important, she should have perceived it that way too. And her moving on with someone else was her violating the sanctity of that agreement. But, like, there's a good chance Summer saw Tom as someone she enjoyed being around, someone she could have a good time with, and that was all. You can share good banter with someone and have fun going out and about with them without it needing to transition to a committed romantic relationship. I think she liked Tom as a person, and in another life, they could have been good friends who enjoyed each other's company platonically. Summer was very clear from the beginning she wasn't looking for anything serious. Tom agreed to that explicitly. Over time, his feelings grew beyond that initial agreement. And A, that's not on her to deal with because now the dynamics have changed from what she agreed to. And B, it's not a mark against her character that her feelings didn't grow to match. She was within her right to end things when she realized the situation was harmful to both of them, and she was within her right to pursue a serious relationship with a man she felt a deeper, lasting connection with. So, those are my two primary arguments. I also have one sub point about something I think isn't as important to keep in mind, but is still a factor. Even though I gave you events in chronological order, the film doesn't play out in order. Like, I'm throwing out random numbers, but scenes could go from day 120 to day 50 to day 80 and so on. We see positive moments from the relationship interspersed among scenes showing its breakdown, and I suspect that leads the viewer to have a falsely positive impression of the relationship overall. For example, I told you that the last scene in timeline order before the breakup is Tom trying the husband wife bit at a furniture store and Summer not being into it at all. When you heard that, you were probably like, oh, well, that's a clear indicator right there. But what if I told you that scene is shown pretty early in the film, in between scenes from the start of the relationship when they were both happy? And what if I reminded you that the very first narrative scene we get in the film is Tom telling his friends about the breakup? We only experience the final scene of their relationship after we know that they're going to break up, and long before we get the context for the conflicts that led up to that point. By nature of how the film presents things, we don't come away with an accurate perception of cause and effect. We're blinded to the fact that their relationship's downhill trajectory was a pretty steady decline, not a sudden drop off. It's an interesting effect because it kind of puts you in Tom's headspace of romanticizing the relationship, overlooking their poor communication in favor of the joyful moments. I'm not sure if that was the director's intention when deciding how they wanted to order the scenes, but it's a neat thing I noticed. On the other hand, I think this can give people the impression that Summer pulled the rug out from under Tom in a way. I mean, the first thing we see is him smashing plates after the breakup, so it's like, whoa, this must have been pretty unexpected. In reality, though, if you saw things play out in order, the way Summer experienced them, in universe, you'd see that the relationship wasn't perfect at any point along the way, except maybe the very early days. Their differing outlooks on relationships caused more and more harm to each of them as time went on. You'd perceive that slide into conflict and discontentedness much clearer if you saw events in order, or if you saw them from Summer's perspective. But Tom didn't want to see the problems. He didn't want to follow the chain of events and understand his own part in how things ended up. In short, the film plays a narrative trick on you by putting you in Tom's shoes, making it seem like the breakup wasn't the inevitable result of two people's incompatibilities being revealed over time. However, I think it's fair to say there were signs along the way that things weren't going well, and he turned a blind eye until he literally couldn't anymore. Summer was unhappy for a while before she ended things, as she mentions during their conversation at the diner. She probably did a lot of emotional processing in that time, leaving her with a solid head start in terms of moving forward. I mean, she even tells Tom they fight all the time, which we didn't see at all in Tom's narrative. It's also a very different situation to end a good relationship amicably, where you still love the person but can't continue for one reason or another, versus breaking off a casual arrangement with someone because you can tell you're hurting each other. If you got married 4 months after the first scenario, I'd be like, maybe a little fast, but I wish you the best. If you got married 4 months after the second scenario, I'd be like, fair play to you. And so to Summer, I say, fair play to you. Those are my thoughts regarding the timeline of relationships and the timeline of Summer getting married after breaking things off with Tom. I hope it all made sense, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on my points in the comments. The last thing I want to address, as you could probably tell from the thumbnail of this video, is each of the two main characters, mainly viewers' allegations of their villainy in the narrative. In the years after the movie came out, a lot of the hate swung towards Summer. People were vocal about how they thought she was awful and 100% in the wrong, and some people even went so far as to say she's the worst movie villain of all time. Like, okay, guys, calm down. But I'm not entirely surprised that was the initial reaction. A lot of media at the time leaned into the trope of women doing men wrong in a romantic context. Think Andy's deception and How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, Andy neglecting her boyfriend Nate in The Devil Wears Prada, that kind of thing. Audiences were primed to view Summer's actions through an antagonistic lens, and it didn't help that, like I discussed, the movie is filtered through Tom's perspective. While Summer still gets a bit of hate in recent years, as evidenced by some of the tweets I found, the pendulum has mostly swung the other way. A lot of people sympathized with Tom early on, but now people recognize his faults, and many call him the villain. Some people were younger when they first watched and have since matured in both age and perspective. Others around my age were too young to have watched the film in 2009, and by the time we watched, we had a more modern perspective on relationship dynamics. Based on everything I've said so far, you might expect me to fall into the Tom is a villain camp. And if I'd watched this 5 years ago, there's a chance I'd have felt that way because, let's face it, the easy thing is to find someone to call a villain. The much harder thing is the argument I've settled on as a mature adult with critical thinking skills. In the film, as is often the case in real life, there is no villain. And let me be clear, that's not to say that neither Tom nor Summer are in the wrong at any point. As I'll cover in the next section, they each have flaws that play into the deterioration of their relationship and the harm that they caused each other. They're not perfect, but calling either of them a villain, that's an easy cop out for the complicated truth that sometimes two people can be normal, nuanced human beings and simply be incompatible with each other. It's much nicer to point the finger at one person and say, it's your fault, you did the bad thing. It's nicer to do what Tom did for most of the film, putting blame on the other person as a way to overlook our own culpability. It makes things black and white and helps us avoid the grittiness of self reflection. To that I say, there are two statements that work in tandem. One, you don't have to be a bad person in order to hurt someone. Two, hurting someone or having hurt someone in the past doesn't automatically make you a bad person. In conclusion, bad people are not the only ones with the capacity to cause harm. People who are otherwise rational and kind can cause harm, intentionally or otherwise, in situations where they feel vulnerable, trapped, etc. If you're truly a bad person, you learn nothing from those experiences and remain willfully ignorant to your own agency, continuing to hurt other people because that's easier than making the effort to change, or because you just don't care. If you're a good person, or even just a decent one, you care that things went wrong and why they went wrong. You reflect on the outcomes of painful situations, which informs future decisions and might even change your wider perspective. From where I stand, that's what happened in 500 Days of Summer. Tom, though it took a while, reflected on his actions and came to understand the faults in his conduct with Summer, especially how he romanticized the idea of the one. He rewrote his lifelong philosophy and opened his mind to the possibility of more than one great love, which led to a promising new connection. Summer was right to end things with Tom, but she realized that her failure to follow her instincts sooner caused both of them unnecessary pain. Thus, when the right person came along, she embraced that feeling and allowed herself to believe in true love. Neither of them are a villain. They're nuanced people who weren't meant to be together, who hurt each other because they ignored that fact, and who underwent vital growth as a result of their reflection on their role in things. That's not just great writing on a storytelling and character development level, that's realistic on a real life relationship level. Stuff like this happens all the time, even if it takes often more than one painful breakup to learn the lessons. And let's be real, not everyone who's been through a messy breakup is a bad person, especially if they've since taken accountability and worked towards making better choices. If you still aren't completely convinced, let's look at Tom and Summer's final scene together, where they unexpectedly reunite at the Angeles Plaza park bench. I think the way they each enter the scene is accurate to their character arcs. Tom comes in with bitterness and animosity, as we see from his first line. Hey guys, so for some reason I can't find a clean clip of the line I'm talking about, or the line that I'm going to mention at the very end, but the line that Tom says here is, "So I should probably say congratulations." He never got to say his piece to Summer, and even though he spent time reflecting on the relationship's imperfections, he did also spend a lot of time stewing in negative feelings. He is not shy about his confusion over her marriage timeline, wondering what changed from her not wanting to be his girlfriend, and he freely tells Summer she undermined his belief in fairy tale love. He has a "you were right about love, therefore you won and I lost" mindset. Summer, like I said earlier, probably made her peace with the end of the relationship before she actually ended things. So she comes in with a head start on healing, plus a happy relationship she was only able to pursue because she ended things. She approaches the conversation like catching up with an old friend, which Tom obviously doesn't take well. However, when he says she was right all along about love not being real, she is mature enough to admit that she gained a different perspective on love thanks to him. Even though she wasn't sure about him romantically, in the end, she was still changed by him and the way he viewed the world while they were together. This is the first time Tom realizes she's a different person than she was with him, and maybe he didn't fully understand her even when she was with him. Most importantly, he sees the significance of their relationship despite it being over now. The change Summer experienced after the hardship has shown its merit in her happy marriage, and if Tom can embrace the way that Summer changed him, it might result in doors opening for him too. At the end, he says this, cutting in again. Here, Tom says, "I really do hope you're happy." His sincerity is a juxtaposition against his ironic question at the beginning, and though she smiles and turns away without replying, it's clear she accepts and appreciates the sentiment. Here, Tom sheds the win loss mentality and can truly move on. He's been taking the physical steps for a while, what with his design prep and job interviews, but now things have emotionally resolved too. He is a more mature, more receptive person than he was when he met her, and arguably more than he was when she sat down next to him on the park bench. Because he embraces the perspective change she sparked in him, he's open to connection when coincidence brings him and Autumn together in the interview waiting room. Both he and Summer grew as people in the aftermath of their relationship, and they put an effort to make better choices in the future so they could avoid the same hurt they caused each other. Neither of them are bad people, neither of them are a villain. That brings to an end the more serious part of the video where I make articulate, thought out points. I'd love to hear your thoughts on anything you agree or disagree with, especially if you changed your mind about the villain of the film over time. The last part of this video, me discussing Tom and Summer as characters, is gonna include genuine thoughts and logic, but I've decided to present it with a bit of an unserious lens. This video has mostly consisted of plot description and in depth discussion about relationship dynamics, so I want to end it on a lighthearted note. So, to close out the video, we're going to dive into Tom and Summer's red, green, and beige flags. We want to get a bigger picture of how their actions and personality traits affected the story, and what these flags would mean in the context of having them as a romantic partner. I think red and green flags are well known concepts, but if you don't know what a beige flag is, it's kind of a neutral trait that doesn't inherently lean positive or negative. It could be, a personality quirk or something like that, where its goodness or badness is decided by the people involved. For this section, I've returned to my trusted slideshow strategy. These categories are more or less my subjective opinions, but I've tried to take into account what the general opinion of each thing would be. We're going to start with Tom, then move on to Summer, and I'll share my final thoughts at the end. Let's go. Okay, so here we have our title slide. You're going to see me looking down, and that's because I'm like looking at my iPad where I have the slideshow pulled up, but I think it'll look natural because I'm up here in the window. But anyway, starting with Tom Hansen. Hope you like the little graphic that I did here. It was pretty fun to play with the shadow and everything. So, Tom's first green flag is that he puts effort into fashion. Now, I understand that by today's standards, this is not anything crazy. Like, especially, the vest vibe, the dress shirts, the blazers. I understand that, like, generally speaking, that's nothing crazy. Like, that's just dressing like decently. However, we we know, we all know that not all guys put this kind of effort into their fashion, into their aesthetics. And I do think that he's pulling it off very well. He has like a clear kind of idea with his wardrobe. He's got these pieces that he can mix and match comfortably. And I like seeing a man put that kind of effort into fashion. So that is a green flag for Tom. I enjoyed seeing his different outfits throughout the movie, and I think they like on like a meta level, wardrobe dressed him in very nice colors that complemented him well. His next green flag is that he commits to karaoke 110%. And obviously, we're gonna like ignore the blind date incident with this one, but towards the beginning, when he's doing karaoke on the office bar night, it is really fun when someone can just commit to having fun with it. Like, you don't have to be the best singer in the world, but if you're like clearly having fun and putting all this effort into it, to like make it a performance, that just makes it a good time for everybody. And so I think that's a green flag. Next, he has a pretty good relationship with his little sister Rachel. Granted, we don't have a ton of context on her home life, like where it sounds like she's still living with their parents because he asks in the beginning like, "Oh, does mom know you're here?" or something like that. But they do seem to have a pretty good relationship where they can banter with each other and she can kind of like bully him a little bit, but he doesn't mind taking it too much. And at the same time, she feels comfortable being direct and straight up with him when she feels like he's not seeing things clearly. And he's actually quite receptive to her saying things like this. It seems like he puts a lot of stock into her opinion and he trusts her. He doesn't mind going to her for advice, which, you could argue that an adult man going to like a 10-year-old for advice is kind of questionable. But, within the context of family, it's like, okay, they seem like they have a good relationship. So I think that's good. Tom is, at least at the end of the film, actively pursuing his passions. I think that's like really cool to see in general, but it is like if you're going to date somebody, you don't want them to just be super complacent in life, right? Like you want them to have goals that they're pursuing, even if it's like one small step at a time. It's nice to see that someone is like driven with that purpose to pursue their passions. So that's another green flag for Tom. And Tom's final green flag specifically is that he's good at yes anding. Now, I know this might lean more towards beige flag for a lot of people because not everyone would be into that kind of back and forth in a relationship. But at the end of the day, I'm going to argue this is a green flag because it keeps conversation going, it keeps a relationship going. If, you know, you get to a point where you're not like able to bounce off of each other, where you're not able to kind of like pass the joke back and forth, and you're just kind of responding like very blandly to things that like the other person's trying to initiate, I think that's like a bad sign that things maybe aren't going super well within the relationship. However, with Tom being so good at yes anding, I don't think things would ever get to that point in a relationship with him. you would certainly never be bored. Like you would never get bored of the conversation dynamic between the two of you. So that is his final green flag. Tom's first beige flag is that he's super into romantic yearning music. Now, this is a beige flag because it can kind of go either way. This could be like genuinely romantic and like, a lot of people talk about like, oh, I want a man that yearns. I want him to be a yearner. So it could be like positive in that way where he is like genuinely going to work really hard to treat you well and to like pamper you and be a really good partner. I think it can also lean the other way, which is what it did for the first part of the film, where he romanticizes certain aspects of love and relationships that aren't even necessarily realistic. He's just romanticizing them in his head because of all of this yearning music that he's listening to. So when it comes to dating a guy who's super into romantic yearning music, I think it's a beige flag. It can go either way. Kind of just depends on the context and the guy. His next beige flag is that he has, or at least he seems to have, no close friendships with women. Now, again, this is one of those things that can go either way, I think. On the one hand, someone can just have, like, maybe someone doesn't have a large circle of friends in general. They have, like, a smaller social circle, and all of those people just happen to not be women. Um, and also, I understand that it's not always the easiest thing to make friends, to form connections in this day and age. So it's not an automatic problem. I don't think it's necessarily always an indicator of something bad. But on the other hand, I think there definitely is something to be said for when a guy has a ton of friends, like large social circle, and the only close connections that he forms are with other men. And that's not inherently a problem, but I think it could indicate difficulty having platonic relationships with women when, like, if A, he's not like attracted to them, and that is definitely something you want to avoid. So that's a beige flag for Tom, but again, it's not inherently a bad thing. And Tom's next beige flag is that he's an idealist. So you might remember pretty early on into the video, I asked you to put a pin in something, which was the scene at the park bench where Tom's like, oh, look at this nice view, and Summer is like, well, look at the parking lot that's right there. That moment is kind of emphasizing the difference between their two outlooks on the world. So Tom has this very idealist perspective, wanting to focus on the good while overlooking some of the bad, which is also, applicable to his perspective on their relationship. While Summer is more of a realist who's gonna like point out the reality of the situation, even if it's not the most favorable thing to be focusing on. And again, being an idealist is not inherently a bad thing. I think there are definitely situations where that can be a very valuable perspective to have, especially in a group, especially when like things are difficult. We do need someone who's gonna keep spirits up and that kind of thing. But in the context of how we see Tom act in the film, I do think it's a beige flag because it can lead to some overlooking of important things, and that can potentially be a problem. Finally, Tom's last beige flag is that he gives you gifts involving his interests. So I didn't show this specifically, but when Tom shows up to Summer's apartment for her party, he brings her this book as a gift. It's called The Architecture of Happiness by, I forget the author's name. I know I looked it up. I can't quite read it behind the expectations and reality text. But she had seen him reading this book on the train on the way to Millie's wedding, and she remarked that, like, oh, that looks interesting. And so he decided to give her the book as a gift. This is a beige flag because I don't think it's inherently a problem, especially because she did like remark on it and say it was interesting. However, it maybe isn't like the best thing to give someone a gift that revolves more around your interest versus theirs, especially because this is in the context of him kind of trying to harken back to that date that they shared together. And, if you were in a relationship with Tom and he was constantly giving you gifts relating to his interests and never to yours, I do think that could become a problem. Tom's first red flag is a pretty obvious one, which is that he thinks he can change you. So that conversation between him, Mackenzie, and Summer in the bar on, I think, day 28, I feel like the clear implication was that Summer said, I don't want to be in a relationship right now. I don't feel comfortable being someone's girlfriend, and I don't believe in love. And Tom heard that, and I feel like he left that conversation being like, maybe I can change her mind, because Mackenzie reveals that Tom like has a crush on Summer, and Tom knows that they are like diametrically opposed on this thing, right? They do not feel the same way about love at this time. And he still goes on to pursue, a casual relationship with her, but we know that he wants more than that. And I think that is a red flag because he should have known that it was not his prerogative to try and change her mind about a conviction that she had so clearly stated. His next red flag is that he has outbursts in public. So, A, punching the guy at the bar, obviously, like, yes, the guy was being a jerk and did not need to insult Tom the way that he did, but at the end of the day, that was verbal, and Tom made it physical. So that's a problem. You never want to be with someone who's going to be initiating violence like that. And another instance is there's like this very quick scene where he's riding the bus, like public transportation, and he's listening to a song that makes him think of Summer. And he's like so mad about this that he screams in the middle of this bus, I hate this song. And the bus driver is like, you're gonna have to get off. So that's not a good look either. You don't really want a partner who's gonna be releasing their anger in outbursts like this, especially not like just out and about having no shame about it. So that's something to think about. His next red flag is that he absolutely projects his fantasies onto you. I feel like, you can take this away from just the film as a whole with the way he romanticizes things, but especially that expectations versus reality section. He got himself like so worked up by this conviction he had of, oh, this is how things are going to go, and just daydreaming about this, and then ended up being extremely hurt and disappointed when things did not go that way. And I just think it's kind of a dangerous mindset to be in where he has like almost this outlined path of how he wants things to go, how he thinks things are going to go. And it's not the best situation to be in with someone. His second to last red flag is that he's not very good at open communication. And this is obviously a theme throughout the movie that gets more or less resolved towards the end. Like, it is something that he works through and like comes to terms with. But he definitely could have told Summer much, much earlier, hey, I'm actually developing real feelings for you. And then they could have had a conversation about how to proceed. I'm sure she would have said, oh, like in that case, we need to kind of take a step back a little bit and maybe spend some time apart, because that's not what she was looking for. But Tom didn't do that. Instead, he just let those feelings fester, and I would argue grew resentful of the fact that she wasn't returning those feelings or knowing to initiate a conversation about it, even though he never directly said anything. So that's a red flag for sure, but one that I would say does get resolved more so by the end. And his last red flag is that he treated a blind date like a therapist. Like I said, this was the hardest scene for me to watch in the whole movie. It is so painfully awkward the way he treats Allison in this scene. And if I was dating Tom and then I found out that in the past he had acted like this towards a woman that he had just met, I would be very concerned by that, especially thinking about, what that means for how he would potentially speak about me if our relationship were to end. So, yes, that is the end of all of Tom's flags. Let me know what you think about some of those, if there were any that you feel like I missed or any that you feel like were in the wrong category. Let me know. But in the meantime, we're going to move on to Summer Finn. I'm going to be like up in the corner here just for a second because I want you to see, like, I don't want to be covering the art that I did with the shadow. So, yeah, just enjoy that for a second. Okay, Summer's first green flag is similar to Tom's, which is that she wears unique fashion with pride. Now, again, I don't know if her fashion would be considered very bold or unique by today's standards, but within the setting of the film, she's very much wearing these vibrant colors, patterns, and like, what's the word, textures that no one else around her is wearing. It really sets her apart and is meant to be sort of a statement of her strong personality, as well as like the kind of almost like back in time feel that she has with like her haircut and whatnot at the beginning. And she is not shy about this fashion at all. This is her. This is like a representation of her personality, and she's very proud of it, which I think is awesome. Again, her second green flag is quite similar, which is that she also commits to karaoke 110%. She even does a good job of kind of priming the crowd beforehand with like a quick little remark or two. And again, it's just like such a fun time when someone is willing to go for it and is not afraid of being perceived one way or another. They're just going to have fun with it and they're going to make it fun for everybody else too. Her third green flag, and this is where we deviate a little bit, is that she is a pro at graceful rejections. Now, I think this is an interesting conversation of like, on the one hand, you don't necessarily have to be super nice when you're saying no to someone because they were not owed your yes in the first place. But there's also, there's no need to be like overbearingly cruel about it either. I think she does a good job of finding kind of a middle ground. Her tone conveys like a firm, clear disinterest, but she's not going out of her way to be like, you thought you had a chance with me? She's just like, no, not interested. You can leave me alone now. Not interested. And I think that's great to see that not only does she have the maturity to approach it that way, but also the confidence of not needing to apologize and not being afraid to be honest. I think that's a very difficult place for a lot of women to reach, understandably so, but I think it's a green flag that she's able to do that. Her next green flag is that she doesn't feign interest in activities. I don't think I explicitly mentioned this in the plot summary, but before like their movie date where they're like laughing along with the rest of the audience, they first tried to go to this art museum and it was like pretty interesting, like kind of abstract concepts for each of the pieces, and they were both like clearly not getting it, not into it at all. And Summer was like happy to be like, this isn't our thing, want to get out of here. And I think that is an important trait to have when you're making plans, going out with people, even in not a romantic context, but especially within a romantic context, to just be honest if you're not having a good time so that you can both figure out what else to do versus just like trying to go along with it because you think that's what the other person wants and then being unhappy and bored the whole time. So, green flag, not faking interest in things. Her next green flag is that she gets along with your eccentric friends. Now, granted, Mackenzie and Paul are not the most eccentric as far as people go. There's like, a scale, I feel, and they're definitely not at the extremes. But they are like pretty quirky, pretty wild, and Summer meets them easily in conversation. She can kind of match the energy, exchange banter with them. She's not fazed by them at all. And so I think this is especially a green flag if you have some of those stronger, more unique personalities in your friend group. That's not going to be a problem if you date Summer because she can get along with people of all personality types. And her final green flag is that she encourages you to follow your dreams. Just like you saw with her pushing Tom to pursue his passion for architecture, she is gonna support you in following your dreams and really chasing your passions, which is arguably one of the best things that you can have in a partner. Now, her first beige flag is that she's not super open to talking about her exes. I do understand most people would consider this a red flag. I'm going to argue it's a beige flag because I think there are valid reasons for not wanting to go super in detail about past relationships, especially if things ended really poorly or if it's still like kind of an emotional sore spot for you. And I'll also point out that there are relationships where people can mutually agree that there's no need to talk about past relationships, they just want to focus on the present. So I don't think it's inherently a bad thing that you're not being open to talking about your exes. It kind of depends on the situation, but at the same time, it could be a potential indicator of not wanting to be direct and honest about certain things. The next beige flag, and actually her second and last beige flag, is that she is a spontaneous decision maker. Now, this can be not too much of an issue when it comes to like I passed an ice cream shop and you know what? I decided I'm in the mood for ice cream. So even though I was on my way somewhere, I'm just going to go ahead and stop in. Or like, oh, I saw like these tickets for an out of state vacation on a great discount. And so I just decided like I'm going to treat myself to a trip. You know, there's stuff like that. But for Summer, her spontaneous decision is that she moved to Los Angeles on a whim and got a job at the greeting card company because it was just like the first thing that came up. Those are huge things to be spontaneously making decisions about. So, depending on if other things kind of fall into that same realm of decision making, that could be a little concerning potentially. Now, her first red flag is that she will embarrass you in public. Now, I took a screen grab from the scene. I don't think I can say on YouTube what it is they were saying, but they were playing a game where you say a word that is representative of male genitalia, let's say it that way. And the idea is that you're competing with each other to say it slightly louder than the other person, and you just keep getting louder and louder until one of you like chickens out. It's like low key sixth grade behavior, but there reaches a point where Tom is like, okay, okay, like we got to stop. People are staring at us, and she's like, kind of like maneuvering around him to keep being able to like literally yell the word in the middle of a public park. And now this scene is like played very lightheartedly, and Tom's not like getting mad at her for this or anything. They're finding it funny and joking around about it within the scene. But I do think almost not knowing when to draw the line with a bit is a problem, and I personally am not a fan of public embarrassment. Anything that will have people being like, what is wrong with her in public? That's a problem for me. Summer's next red flag is that she does send mixed signals sometimes. So, like I said, I don't consider her a villain, but I can acknowledge that she also did not have perfect conduct within the film and within the relationship. When she first kisses Tom in the copy room, it is 2 or 3 days after she told him, I think we should be friends. And that is confusing. I'll give him that. I would not blame him for being like, oh, we're like launching into something because that is a very like 180 turnaround. And I do think when she turns up at his apartment after the bar fight and is being like, I can't give you emotional consistency. I do think it was also on her in that moment to hear Tom saying, I need emotional consistency from you. And if, she knew she couldn't give that to him, I do think she also had the ability to be like, maybe we have to acknowledge that this is not going to work. But instead, she also chose to kiss him and to not break things off there because at the time that was easier than actually ending things. Her second to last red flag is that she lacks direct communication. This is the one area where I will say I do think she's in the wrong, plainly in the wrong. Her and Tom run into each other on the train on the way to Millie's wedding, and he has no reason to suspect that she is already in another relationship. And he is interacting with her as though this is them like reconnecting and they have maybe another shot at being something. And I do think it was a very deliberate choice on Summer's part not to tell him that she was already in a very serious relationship with this other man. It's not that she owed him that information, of course. However, I do think she made the intentional choice to withhold that information, knowing that if she told him, then it would pretty much sever the bridge between them permanently, and that he would not really be able to treat her as just a friend once he learned that information. So I do think that's a red flag. And finally, her last red flag is that she will compare your relationship to a real life tragedy. Now, I understand that her wanting to make this comparison was trying to get through to Tom just how intense their incompatibilities are. But I do think it's like, I don't know if insensitive is the right word, but kind of just off to be like, oh yeah, we are like a couple where the guy, like Sid, killed his girlfriend Nancy. Like, oh, we're Sid and Nancy. And I'm like the guy who killed his girlfriend because I'm hurting you. Just like, I feel like, there are better ways to say that. There are better ways to say that. And I don't love that. I'm dating Summer. Our arguments, you're going to compare our arguments to literal domestic murder. Okay, that's a bit much. But yes, that brings us to the end of the flags. All right, we're back to full screen for the outro. 500 Days of Summer kind of has La La Land status for me now. I haven't watched it a ton, just the initial watch and a second time to take notes on the plot, but it's resonated with me to the point that it'll linger forever even if I never watch it again. There aren't a ton of classic films where I 100% understand the hype, but this is one of them, and I'm glad I finally experienced it for myself. These characters aren't perfect, but they're real, and I appreciate the director's willingness to break the romantic drama mold a little. I can't wait to discuss this with people that I meet in real life. I'd definitely like to hear more perspectives, and I'd like to hear yours. I hope I presented you with some thought-provoking points, and maybe you'll be able to rewatch the movie with a different lens. If nothing else, I hope you leave this video with some material to reflect, either on the film or on aspects of your own life and thought processes. It's taken some time, but at this point, I think the film is a vessel for positive change and discussion rather than animosity. That brings us to the end of this video. Thank you very much for watching. If you feel like you took something away from it, please do leave a like and comment to let me know which part of the film stood out to you the most. If you want to see more content like this, definitely subscribe, and I will see you the next time I open my notes app. Bye!